Imagine yourself waking in the faint light of a medieval dawn, somewhere in northern Europe, perhaps in the rolling fields of England, France, or Germany. The air is damp with morning mist, the chill clinging to your thin woolen tunic. You are a peasant, one of the countless ordinary people who live their lives within the rhythm of the seasons, bound to the land you work but seldom own. Today, as with every day, your first thoughts will likely turn to food. What will sustain you through the long hours of labor ahead? But if you hope for variety, for freshness, or for anything resembling modern comfort, the truth will be somewhat disappointing. For the medieval peasant, food is not a matter of pleasure. It is an instrument of survival, carefully rationed, repetitive, and sometimes surprisingly harsh. Most peasants eat 2 meals a day, sometimes 3 in the coldest months. Breakfast, if it occurs at all, might be a small portion of coarse bread dipped in ale or a bit of leftover porridge. The main meal, eaten in the late morning or early afternoon, is the heart of the day, taken in a single, often rushed sitting after hours of labor in the fields. Supper is usually light, a second helping of porridge, or perhaps some boiled vegetables. Bread, the foundation of life. Bread is the universal staple. But the bread you find in a peasant household is far from the soft, white loaves we might imagine. The coarsest bread is made from barley, rye, or oats, sometimes mixed with a small proportion of wheat if it is available. The grinding process is primitive, producing a dense, gritty flour. Bakers, if you can find one in a small village, often mix the flour with water and a little salt and bake the resulting dough in communal ovens. For the poorest peasants, bread may be baked at home in a small clay oven, giving it a rough, sometimes burnt crust. This bread is not just food, it is the very measure of sustenance, the benchmark of survival. One loaf can last a family several days, especially if the family is careful. A large family might have only a few pounds of flour per week. Each slice, therefore, must be carefully rationed. The texture is heavy, the flavor earthy, sometimes sour, and yet for many peasants, this bread forms 70–80% of their daily caloric intake. The remaining portion comes from vegetables, legumes, and occasionally meat or dairy, depending on availability and local customs. The vegetables of the poor vegetables are modest and seasonal. Cabbage, onions, leeks, and turnips dominate the medieval peasant's diet. Beans and peas are invaluable, providing the protein that bread alone cannot supply. In the warmer months, wild greens, nettles, and herbs might be foraged. Potatoes, surprisingly, are absent. They would not arrive in Europe until the late 16th century. Carrots exist but are not yet the orange varieties we know today. They tend to be small, purple, or white. Cooking is a simple affair. Most peasants have a single hearth, sometimes a small iron pot suspended over the fire. Meals are often boiled rather than roasted. Porridge is a staple, made from the same coarse grains used for bread. It is filling, though monotonous, and often flavored with herbs or whatever vegetables are at hand. Occasionally, milk or cheese might be added, if a family has access to a cow or goat. The occasional treat of meat and fish meat is rare and expensive. Most peasants rely on the animals they raise for labor: oxen, cows, pigs, and chickens, and cannot afford to eat them regularly. Pigs may be slaughtered once or twice a year, usually around winter, producing salted pork that will last for months. Chickens provide eggs rather than meat. Hunting is strictly controlled by nobility, so wild game is largely forbidden for commoners. Fish, in contrast, is a slightly more accessible source of protein, especially in regions near rivers, lakes, or coasts. Religious practices also shape this aspect of diet. The church mandates fasting days, Fridays, Lent, and other holy periods, during which meat consumption is prohibited. Fish becomes the main source of protein, though it is often salted or dried for preservation, making it far from fresh. Cod, herring, and eel are common choices, sometimes boiled, sometimes baked, but rarely enjoyed for flavor alone. The roll of ale and small beer water is not always safe to drink. Wells may be contaminated, rivers may be shared with livestock, and stagnant water is a breeding ground for disease. Ale and small beer, weakly brewed and low in alcohol, provide a safer alternative. They are consumed throughout the day, not as an indulgence, but as a necessity. For children and adults alike, these beverages provide hydration and calories, though they are far from the strong beers and ales we know today. Seasonal hunger and famine. Even with careful planning, the medieval peasant's life is one of constant uncertainty. Crop failure, bad weather, or disease can bring famine in any given year. When grain runs short, families must stretch what they have or turn to less desirable foods, roots, wild plants, or even bark. These periods of scarcity are not always dramatic in historical records, but are devastating to the ordinary people who endure them. Mortality rates rise, children suffer, and communities shrink, sometimes by significant proportions, before the next harvest restores balance. The social and economic context food is not only a matter of biology, it is also deeply tied to social and economic structures. Peasants are often bound to the land they work, paying rent or labor dues to a lord. In many cases, a portion of their produce must be given to the local manor, leaving even less for their own tables. Taxes in kind, tithes to the church, and occasional feudal fines further reduce the amount of food that reaches a family's hearth. In essence, the diet of a peasant is a reflection of the social hierarchy itself. The poorer you are, the simpler, grittier, and more monotonous your meals will be. Cultural perceptions of food, despite the hardship, there is a rich, if subtle, culture around eating. Meals mark time and season. Festivals, religious holidays, and local fairs offer moments of respite from the mundane diet, introducing spices, sweetened treats, or rare meats. But these occasions are exceptions, not the rule. Peasants often develop an intimate knowledge of the foods they do have, how to store them, how to cook them without spoiling, and how to extract the maximum nutrition from meager resources. A thought to carry forward: as you drift through the rhythms of a peasant's day, you begin to see that food is not merely sustenance, it is a measure of life itself. The coarse bread, the boiled vegetables, the occasional salted fish, they shape work, rest, family, and community. And yet, even within this repetitive, constrained diet, there are small strategies of resilience: fermentation, drying, boiling, rationing, and foraging. But even with these strategies, life is precarious. How did peasants manage the unpredictability of harvests and the looming threat of famine? What subtle practices evolved over centuries to help ordinary people survive in a world where a poor crop could mean the difference between life and death? This question lingers in the air, unresolved, like the smell of baking bread that might not be enough to feed the family through the week. As dawn breaks over the medieval village, you begin to notice the subtle ways in which the rhythm of the year shapes every meal, every decision, and every moment of peasant life. Food is not merely eaten, it is carefully managed, stored, and rationed. Every harvest, every season, and every animal has its role in the fragile ecosystem of survival. To understand the peasant diet fully, you must look beyond the daily plate and into the systems that allow families to endure the relentless pressures of medieval life. The cycle of planting and harvesting in spring. Planting begins. Fields are ploughed, seeds are sown, and a delicate hope takes root. Grain is the backbone of survival: wheat, barley, rye, and oats. Each has advantages and drawbacks. Wheat produces a lighter bread, more desirable to the noble classes, but it is fragile and requires fertile soil. Rye and barley are hardier, more resilient to poor soils and inclement weather, making them staples for peasants. Oats are often used for porridge or animal feed. The planting schedule is critical, for a mistake can result in delayed growth, poor yields, and ultimately, harvesting is a communal affair, a labor-intensive process that begins as soon as the grain turns golden. Scythers and sickles cut the stalks, which are then gathered into bundles called sheaves. After threshing, where grain is separated from chaff, the precious kernels are stored carefully to prevent spoilage. Grain storage is a science of its own. Elevated bins, tightly sealed containers, and constant vigilance against moisture, rodents, and mold are required. Even a small failure in storage can lead to weeks or months of food loss, turning a year of labor into hardship. Preservation and preparation. Because refrigeration does not exist, medieval peasants rely heavily on preservation techniques. Salted, smoked, or dried meat and fish are common, as are dried beans, peas, and grains. Herbs like thyme, sage, and rosemary are sometimes used not only for flavor but also for their slight preservative qualities. Fermentation is another quiet marvel. Sourdough bread, ale, and even certain vegetable preparations rely on controlled microbial activity to extend usability. Each of these processes demands patience, observation, and experience, knowledge passed quietly from parent to child over generations. Daily preparation is laborious. Before you can even think of sitting down to eat, firewood must be gathered, water drawn from a well or stream, and pots heated. Cooking is slow. Boiling is safer than roasting because it kills harmful bacteria, but it requires careful attention, constant stirring, and a watchful eye to prevent burning. A pot of porridge may simmer for hours, its texture changing slowly, while vegetables and legumes soften to digestible forms. Bread, baked once or twice a week, must be divided judiciously. It is not merely a meal, but a currency of survival. The role of seasonal foods. Seasonality governs the peasant diet more than anything else. Spring brings wild greens and tender shoots. sometimes foraged from hedgerows and woods. Early summer allows peas, beans, and other legumes to ripen, providing crucial protein. By midsummer, fruits such as apples, plums, and berries become available, though they are often eaten sparingly or preserved through drying. Autumn is the time of the main harvest, when grain, root vegetables, and late fruits are gathered and stored for the coming winter. Winter is lean, a season of endurance, when stored grains, salted meats, and dried legumes sustain families through months of cold, dark days. Fasting festivals and the unexpected, the church exerts a profound influence on what peasants eat. Fasting days are numerous, sometimes leaving a family with only fish, vegetables, and bread for the day. Lent, in particular, is a period of extended abstinence from meat. Yet these restrictions sometimes create subtle improvements. Fasting encourages the consumption of legumes and vegetables, which might otherwise be undervalued, and encourages creative approaches to limited ingredients. At the same time, festivals and holy days punctuate the monotony. Saints' days, harvest festivals, and village fairs allow peasants rare indulgences, a bit of meat, a sweetened treat, or spiced ale. These days provide more than nutrition. They strengthen community bonds, mark the passage of time, and remind people that life contains moments of respite, even in hardship. Water ale and hydration is a constant concern. Water sources are unreliable, often shared with animals, and sometimes contaminated. Small beer, weekly fermented, is a daily necessity, consumed morning, noon, and evening. This weak ale, containing just enough alcohol to prevent spoilage, provides calories, fluids, and a small measure of safety in a world where contaminated water could mean illness or death. Children drink it too, though in smaller amounts. Hygiene, or the lack thereof, shapes how peasants manage food. Kitchens are smoky, floors dirt-streaked, and rodents are ever present. The careful washing of hands, pots, and surfaces is rudimentary. Mold, flies, and bacteria are constant threats. Peasants develop intuitive knowledge about what is safe to eat. Fermented foods, boiled grains, and dried meats are favored, while anything that looks, smells, or feels off is avoided. Yet accidents happen, and foodborne illness is a silent, unrecorded killer in peasant households. The economics of food is tightly bound to wealth and status. Even among peasants, variations exist. A family with a small herd of cows or a few pigs enjoys a slightly richer diet, while landless laborers rely almost entirely on grains and legumes. Taxes and feudal obligations take a portion of every harvest. A tithe of 1/10 to the local church is standard, while dues to the lord of the manor claim a portion of grain or labor. During difficult years, these obligations may be modified or delayed, but they remain a constant factor in planning for survival. Bartering and local markets provide occasional relief. Peasants might exchange surplus eggs, cheese, or vegetables for flour, salt, or a bit of meat. Markets foster modest variety, though the cost of transport and scarcity of goods keeps most diets simple. Every transaction is measured, carefully weighed, and remembered. Survival is not only a matter of labor but of clever resource management, patience, and negotiation. The hidden knowledge of food. What is remarkable about peasant diets is not the luxury or abundance, but the quiet, learned expertise that enables survival. They know which grains store best, which herbs mask spoilage, which vegetables are nutritious when boiled for hours. They understand the subtle timing of planting, harvesting, and preserving. Each family, each village, becomes a repository of practical knowledge, a slow, deliberate curriculum of survival passed down in hands-on instruction. Yet even with all this knowledge, life remains precarious. A failed harvest, a harsh winter, or a pestilence can undo years of careful preparation. And this is the tension that underlies every meal, every rationed loaf, every carefully measured portion of porridge, the awareness that sustenance is fragile, that survival is never guaranteed, and that the labor of a year can be undone in a matter of weeks. A lingering question, as you follow the peasant through their daily routines, from the sowing of seeds to the careful division of bread, you may wonder, how did families endure the constant uncertainty of supply? How did knowledge, observation, and community practices evolve to prevent complete disaster? And what subtle customs, now long forgotten, allowed ordinary people to feed themselves despite a world that could so easily starve them? These questions remain open, whispering across the centuries, as the peasant prepares for another day of labor, another meal of coarse bread, and another cycle of survival. As the day draws to a close in a medieval village, you step back and begin to see the full tapestry of peasant life through the lens of food. What seemed at first glance to be monotonous, gruel, coarse bread, boiled vegetables, salted fish, is, in reality, a complex system of survival, adaptation, and quiet ingenuity. The daily bread of peasants carries with it centuries of accumulated knowledge, lessons learned in the margins of life where scarcity was the rule, not the exception. Endurance through simplicity. One of the most striking aspects of the peasant diet is its simplicity. Meals rarely vary and ingredients are limited to what can be grown, raised, or foraged locally. Yet this simplicity is deceptive. It represents a careful balance of energy, nutrition, and preservation. A bowl of porridge, a slice of rye bread, a handful of beans. These provide just enough sustenance to keep the body moving through long days of labor in fields, meadows, and forests. They are measured not by taste but by necessity, and in that measure lies resilience. Peasants develop practical knowledge about each ingredient. They know that certain grains store longer, that salted pork lasts through winter, that wild herbs can provide vitamins and preserve flavor. They understand the timing of planting, harvesting, and rationing. And perhaps most importantly, they develop a keen awareness of risk. A loaf of bread may look fine on the surface but may harbor mold within. Fish may smell sweet but be subtly spoiled. This vigilance, honed over generations, is a quiet, everyday expertise that ensures survival more than any grand feast could. The social fabric of food also defines relationships. Sharing a loaf, splitting a pot of porridge, or pooling resources during famines strengthens the social bonds within a household and a village. Communal baking and shared ovens reflect a broader ethic of interdependence. No peasant lives entirely alone, and no meal is consumed without awareness of scarcity and need. Festivals and holy days further reinforce this social cohesion, offering a temporary escape from monotony and a chance to participate in communal celebrations that momentarily elevate the diet beyond survival alone. In the hierarchy of medieval society, food is also a reflection of social status. While peasants subsist on coarse grains and boiled vegetables, nobility indulge in meat, spiced breads, and imported delicacies. Yet, within the peasant class, small variations in diet, more milk, a few eggs, or occasional game, can mark subtle distinctions of wealth and security. In this way, food serves as both sustenance and social currency, reinforcing relationships, hierarchies, and obligations. Coping with famine and hardship. Despite all knowledge and care, famine and scarcity are constant threats. Years of poor harvest can reduce entire communities to extreme hunger. Yet historical records suggest remarkable resilience. Peasants employ strategies that seem mundane today but were critical to survival, storing grain in elevated bins to avoid moisture and rodents, using salted meat to last months, rationing porridge carefully, and foraging for wild plants and herbs. Each method reflects a deep understanding of local ecology and climate, demonstrating the ingenuity required to endure life in a world without modern conveniences. Famine also leads to adaptations in cuisine. During difficult years, peasants may turn to unconventional foods, the inner bark of trees, acorns, or leftover grains that would normally be fed to animals. These measures are last resorts, yet they illustrate a key point: survival depends not only on abundance but on flexibility, observation, and knowledge passed down through generations. Religious influence and cultural practices. The church plays a significant role in shaping diet, with fasting periods, holy days, and rules about meat consumption influencing what is eaten and when. While modern readers may view this as deprivation, for medieval peasants, these rhythms structured the year and occasionally introduced nutritional variety. Fish and legumes become regular staples during fasting periods, encouraging dietary practices that, ironically, may have supported better health than otherwise monotonous diets. These cultural practices highlight how societal structures, belief systems, and daily survival were intertwined in ways that modern meals rarely reflect. The invisible labor behind food. For the modern mind, it may be easy to dismiss the peasant diet as dull, tasteless, or impoverished. But when you examine it closely, you see the extraordinary labor that underlies every meal. From dawn until dusk, peasants plant, tend, harvest, preserve, and cook. Every meal is the culmination of hours, days, and months of careful work. Even the simplest slice of rye bread represents planning, labor, and knowledge. And even a bowl of boiled beans reflects centuries of agricultural practice, storage, innovation, and seasonal observation. Reflections on resilience. What can we learn from this rhythm of life? Perhaps it is a lesson in resilience, patience, and adaptation. Peasants demonstrate a subtle mastery of environment, resources, and timing that allowed human communities to endure centuries of hardship. They survive not through extravagance, but through careful management, observation, and the willingness to work in tune with natural cycles. Even in the face of scarcity, peasants cultivate creativity in cuisine, mixing grains, stretching meat with legumes, brewing small beer, and experimenting with herbs. These quiet innovations reflect not culinary indulgence but survival-driven ingenuity. Each adaptation is a testament to human resilience, an ongoing experiment in sustaining life under constraint. The legacy of the peasant diet, the diet of medieval peasants, may seem removed from our modern experience, but its influence is surprisingly enduring. Many contemporary staples, bread, porridge, legumes, seasonal vegetables, trace their roots to these practices. Preservation techniques such as salting, drying, and fermenting persist in various forms. Even cultural practices like communal baking or seasonal celebrations echo these ancient rhythms. The humdrum meals of peasants, often overlooked in history, played a profound role in shaping the foodways and survival strategies of later generations. A final thought: as you imagine the peasant breaking the last loaf of bread at the end of a long day, you begin to appreciate the subtle complexity of ordinary life. These were people who lived in a world where food was never guaranteed, where labor and timing determined survival, and where knowledge, rather than wealth, often meant the difference between life and death. The monotony of their meals masks a deeper story, one of human ingenuity, adaptation, and the quiet, enduring rhythm of survival. And perhaps the most compelling question lingers: in a world so precarious, where every meal depended on careful labor and relentless observation, how did ordinary people maintain hope, culture, and community across centuries? What can their endurance teach us about the resilience of humanity when faced with scarcity and uncertainty? Picture yourself walking through the towering wooden gates of a medieval castle, its stone walls gleaming faintly in the early morning sun. Inside, the air is thick with the aroma of roasted meats, spiced sauces, and the occasional tang of burning herbs. Unlike the humble hearth of the peasant, the noble kitchen is a theater of preparation, hierarchy, and ritual. Here, food is not merely sustenance, it is a demonstration of power, wealth, and taste. Every ingredient, every dish, and every presentation is designed to impress, maintain social order, and subtly reinforce the position of those at the top of the feudal hierarchy. The importance of display for medieval nobility: meals were social and political events. A feast was a performance, carefully choreographed to display abundance and refinement. Servants scurried through vast kitchens, attending to cauldrons, roasting spits, and baking ovens. A master cook oversaw teams of apprentices and specialized staff, ensuring that every dish conformed to both culinary and aesthetic standards. The table was set with precision, polished trenchers of wood or, for the wealthiest households, plates of metal or even ceramic, decorative napkins, elaborate centerpieces of flowers or carved wax, and the strategic placement of guests all reinforced the hierarchy of status and influence. Unlike the peasant's simple bread and porridge, a noble feast could involve dozens of dishes, each designed for taste, presentation, or ceremony. Multiple courses were introduced gradually, often beginning with soups or pottages, followed by roasted meats, pies, fish, and sometimes elaborate desserts. Spices such as cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and saffron were prized not only for flavor but for their rarity and expense, signaling wealth and access to global trade networks. Meals as ritual and power, the table itself as a stage. Nobles sat according to rank, with the lord or lady of the castle presiding at the head. Guests were seated carefully, with proximity to the host indicating status. The act of eating became a demonstration of etiquette and decorum. Those who failed to display proper manners risked social embarrassment or worse. Meals were opportunities to negotiate alliances, impress visiting dignitaries, or display the scope of a household's wealth. Even the simplest act of passing a dish required attention to rank and protocol. In this environment, food is simultaneously nourishment, spectacle, and social instrument. A boar roasted whole, its skin glistening and spices perfuming the air, is more than a meal. It is a statement of dominance over both nature and subjects. A pie might conceal intricate layers of meat, fruit, and sometimes live birds. A surprising display of skill, ingenuity, and theatrics intended to provoke admiration. Every dish tells a story of abundance, control, and meticulous preparation. The ingredients of status: while peasants subsist on coarse bread and local vegetables, nobles enjoy access to imported goods and rare ingredients. Sugar, a luxury even in its crystalline form, appears in small quantities used to create subtle sweets or elaborate decorations. Almonds, citrus fruits, and spices signal international trade and wealth. Meat dominates the noble diet: beef, pork, venison, fowl, and game birds are abundant. Fish, fresh or preserved, is served not merely on fasting days but as a demonstration of variety and refinement. Herbs and seasonings are used liberally, not only for taste but to demonstrate culinary knowledge. Cooks combine ingredients in ways unfamiliar to the average peasant, crafting sauces, fillings, and pastries that require skill, precision, and time. Each ingredient is carefully sourced, sometimes imported over long distances at great expense. Even salt, relatively mundane to peasants, becomes a sign of sophistication when applied judiciously to enhance flavor rather than merely preserve. The labor behind luxury, all this abundance comes at a cost: labor, organization, and knowledge. Noble households employ a range of specialized staff: kitchen maids, scullery workers, master cooks, bakers, butchers, and even those whose sole task is to maintain fires or carry water. The scale of operations is immense. For a major feast, dozens of staff might work for hours or days, preparing ingredients, roasting meats, and assembling dishes. Cooks must anticipate the timing of multiple items, ensuring that everything reaches the table hot and perfectly cooked. Coordination is critical, for even a small mistake, a burnt sauce or overcooked bird, could mar the display of wealth and refinement. The role of ceremony and entertainment: a feast is rarely only about food. Entertainment is carefully interwoven into the event. Minstrels, dancers, jesters, or even small performances are arranged to accompany each course. The presentation of dishes may be theatrical, with elaborate centerpieces, sculpted pastries, or pies concealing live animals for dramatic effect. Music, lighting, and the sheer spectacle of the table reinforce the power of the host. To the visiting peasant or lower-ranked noble, such displays might seem overwhelming, almost excessive, but they are integral to the politics of dining. Wealth, taste, and organization speak louder than words. Nutrition and reality: while the feasts of nobility appear luxurious, the actual nutritional quality is mixed. Meals are heavy in meat and fat, with vegetables often secondary. Overconsumption, especially of rich meats and sweetened foods, can lead to digestive discomfort, gout, or other maladies. Hygiene in kitchens remains imperfect, despite the scale of labor and attention to display. Large quantities of food are stored and transported in conditions that risk spoilage. Yet, relative to peasants, the abundance is extraordinary. These meals sustain the elite, reinforce social order, and create a stark contrast to the survival-driven monotony of the peasant diet. A lingering question: as the candles flicker and the last course is cleared, one begins to wonder, how did these displays of wealth, power, and culinary expertise shape the perceptions and ambitions of those who witnessed them? And perhaps more subtly, how did the contrast between noble abundance and peasant scarcity define the broader social and economic structures of medieval life? The question lingers as the staff begins the laborious process of cleaning, storing leftovers, and preparing for the next meal, a cycle that repeats endlessly in the world of medieval nobility, as it does in the lives of peasants, though under vastly different circumstances. As you move behind the polished tables and lavishly decorated halls of a medieval castle, you begin to see that a noble feast is far more than the sum of its ingredients. Every dish, every spice, and every morsel is part of a carefully orchestrated system, one that combines labor, economics, and social signaling into an elaborate performance. Understanding this system requires attention to the hidden mechanisms of supply, the trade networks that supply luxury goods, and the subtle interactions among guests and staff that make these feasts enduring symbols of medieval life. Planning a feast does not appear spontaneously. It is meticulously planned, sometimes weeks in advance. The master of the household, often with advice from stewards or cooks, decides the menu based on the occasion, the guests, and the season. Religious calendars are considered. Certain meats may be prohibited during fasting periods, so fish or vegetable-based dishes must be included. Seasonal availability dictates which fruits, herbs, and vegetables will appear on the table. This planning ensures that the feast not only nourishes but also impresses, demonstrating wealth, knowledge, and refinement. Menus are detailed documents in some of the largest households, listing each dish, its ingredients, and preparation instructions. For extremely important events, royal visits, weddings, or religious festivals, entire teams of cooks may be assigned to individual components: one for fish, one for pastries, another for sauces, and so on. Timing is crucial. Meat may need hours to roast on a spit, pies must be baked just before serving, and sauces require careful simmering. The coordination is a kind of choreography, ensuring that every dish reaches the table at the peak of its flavor and appearance. Supply chains and trade networks: the ingredients themselves reveal the global scope of medieval trade. Spices such as pepper, cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg traveled thousands of miles from Asia to European markets, carried by complex networks of merchants, caravans, and ships. Sugar, rare and expensive, often arrived from distant colonies or trade hubs. Almonds, citrus fruits, and exotic preserves further exemplify the reach of commerce. The presence of these ingredients at a noble table demonstrates not just wealth, but access to an entire international system of trade, a privilege unavailable to ordinary peasants. Local procurement also plays a role. Game, livestock, grains, and vegetables are often sourced from the lord's lands or neighboring villages. Specialized bakers, butchers, and fishmongers supply prepared ingredients, ensuring quality and consistency. The combined effort of local and long-distance sourcing illustrates a remarkable interplay between self-sufficiency and commerce. Noble households depend on both their immediate domain and the wider world to sustain their culinary ambitions. Staff hierarchies and labor division behind the scenes. A vast hierarchy of staff maintains the kitchen and service. At the top is the master cook, responsible for design, quality, and timing. Beneath him are specialized cooks for meats, fish, soups, and pastries, each managing teams of assistants and apprentices. Scullery workers handle cleaning and dish preparation, while kitchen maids carry ingredients, maintain fires, and assist in the assembly of dishes. The complexity of these roles reflects both the scale of the feast and the social hierarchy embedded in labor itself. Even the act of serving is structured. Junior staff may serve less prestigious guests, while the most experienced attendants handle the lord, lady, or visiting dignitaries. The training and knowledge embedded in this hierarchy are impressive. Cooks must understand roasting times, the subtleties of seasoning, and the intricacies of timing multiple dishes simultaneously. Fire control is a constant concern. Roasting spits, boiling cauldrons, and baking ovens all require careful attention. Even minor errors, a burnt crust, a poorly spiced sauce, could diminish the visual and social impact of the meal, making precision essential. The social theater of eating. Once the dishes reach the table, the feast becomes a theater of social interaction. Nobles observe hierarchy, etiquette, and protocol. The position at the table, the order of serving, and even the use of utensils communicate social rank and influence. Conversation often revolves around alliances, land disputes, and political maneuvering, with the meal serving as both context and instrument for negotiation. Certain courses carry symbolic weight. Fish dishes during fasting periods reflect religious observance, while elaborate meat pies may demonstrate mastery over both cooking and artistry. Desserts, sugar sculptures, and spiced pastries communicate wealth, refinement, and access to rare goods. The spectacle is as important as flavor. The display of abundance reinforces the lord's authority and impresses visitors with the household's resources and organization. The practicalities of consumption. Despite the grandeur, practical concerns remain. Hygiene in large kitchens is imperfect. Food spoilage is a risk, particularly with large quantities of meat and dairy. Preservation techniques, salting, smoking, and careful storage mitigate some of these risks, though accidents occur. Overeating can be an issue, with rich meats and sweets occasionally causing digestive distress among the indulgent elite. Yet, in comparison to peasant diets, abundance allows flexibility. Surplus can be distributed, stored, or consumed over days, reducing immediate vulnerability to scarcity. Cultural and political implications. Feasts reflect more than appetite. They mirror culture and politics. The careful orchestration of food, space, and ritual reinforces feudal hierarchies. Visitors understand their position relative to the host. Guests are reminded of wealth and access, while hosts demonstrate organizational skill, generosity, and strategic acumen. The feast becomes a subtle negotiation of power, where every dish is a statement, and every toast reinforces bonds or asserts dominance. A lingering question as the feast concludes. The final plates cleared, and the staff begins the arduous process of cleaning. One cannot help but wonder, how did these displays of culinary wealth shape the perceptions and ambitions of observers, both noble and common? How did the contrast between peasant scarcity and noble indulgence maintain the social order? And what subtle lessons about economy, trade, and hierarchy did these feasts silently teach across generations? The answers are embedded in the rhythm of preparation, the choreography of service, and the hidden labor behind every roasted boar and spiced pea. A world both distant and surprisingly instructive about human ingenuity and social organization. As the last candle flickers in the vast dining hall and the echoes of laughter and conversation fade, you begin to perceive the full significance of the medieval noble feast. It was more than food, more than sustenance, and more than spectacle. Each meal was a carefully constructed theater of power, wealth, and influence, a reflection of social hierarchies, economic reach, and cultural identity. To understand the feast is to glimpse the machinery that maintained medieval society and shaped the experiences of every class, from lords to peasants. Feasts as instruments of authority. At the heart of noble dining was the demonstration of authority. The sheer abundance of ingredients, the meticulous presentation of dishes, and the orchestrated service all reinforced the social position of the host. Guests understood their place through subtle cues: proximity to the lord or lady, the order of serving, and the allocation of choice cuts of meat or rare delicacies. Every gesture, every plate, and every toast carried symbolic weight. The feast was a performance in which the host's power was communicated silently, yet unmistakably, to all present. Power was also exercised through generosity. A host who provided lavish fare and entertained with skill was seen as competent, influential, and capable of maintaining loyalty. Feasts functioned as an extension of governance. Alliances were reinforced, disputes mitigated, and favors exchanged, all under the guise of conviviality. In a world without modern media or formalized diplomacy, food and ceremony became central instruments of political and social control. Contrast and the maintenance of hierarchy. The difference between peasant and noble diets underscores the social order. While the majority of the population subsisted on bread, porridge, and occasional salted meat or fish, nobles enjoyed an abundance of meats, imported spices, and sweetened confections. This stark contrast was not accidental. It reinforced the divisions inherent in the feudal system. By making wealth and access to resources highly visible through meals, the elite ensured that their dominance was not merely legal or military but cultural and symbolic. Yet even within the nobility, variations existed. The scale of the feast, the rarity of spices, and the sophistication of presentation marked subtle gradations of status. Lesser nobles might host modest feasts, relying more heavily on local produce, while the wealthiest magnates could afford exotic ingredients and elaborate theatrics. The table thus became a mirror of society, reflecting rank, ambition, and influence in tangible form. Economic and trade implications. Feasts also reveal the interconnectedness of medieval economies. Ingredients were sourced locally, regionally, and internationally, linking distant markets in a chain of supply that fed the elite. Spices from the east, sugar from distant colonies, almonds from Mediterranean groves. Each ingredient tells a story of trade, commerce, and the mobility of goods in an era without industrial transportation. The demand for luxury items fueled long-distance trade, created merchant networks, and shaped European economic development in subtle but enduring ways. A noble's appetite, in this sense, was an engine of global exchange long before globalization became a concept. Culinary knowledge and innovation beyond politics and economy. Noble feasts were laboratories of culinary innovation. Master cooks experimented with flavors, textures, and presentations in ways inaccessible to the majority of the population. Recipes evolved to combine local and imported ingredients, balancing taste, appearance, and nutritional needs. Techniques such as roasting, baking pies, preparing sauces, and creating elaborate sugar sculptures reflect a sophisticated understanding of food science for the era. Though largely forgotten today, these practices laid foundations for European culinary traditions, influencing how we approach cooking, flavor combinations, and presentation centuries later. The cultural memory of feasts. Feasts also had a role in cultural memory and identity. Chronicles, poems, and illustrated manuscripts often record the ingredients, rituals, and spectacles of noble dining, preserving a window into the social world of the elite. Through these records, we gain insight into priorities, values, and aesthetics: what was celebrated, what was feared, and how hierarchy was maintained. Even the most mundane detail, a choice spice, a carefully carved pie, becomes historically meaningful, a thread connecting human experience across centuries. Lessons in human organization. When you step back, the complexity of these feasts reveals lessons in organization, planning, and resource management. Coordinating dozens of dishes, sourcing rare ingredients, and orchestrating staff with precise timing required intelligence, foresight, and collaboration. The same principles that maintained a feast: logistics, hierarchy, specialization, and adaptability, mirror the structures that allowed medieval society to function despite its lack of modern technology. The feast is thus both a reflection of and a contributor to the resilience of the social order. A lingering question: as the last remnants of spiced wine are drained and the hall returns to silence, one might wonder, how did these displays of abundance and ceremony influence the perceptions of those who did not partake? The peasants, the traveling merchants, or minor nobles observing the hierarchy? Did the contrast between scarcity and plenty reinforce obedience, inspire aspiration, or simply underscore the arbitrary nature of wealth and access? And how did the rituals and innovations of these feasts ripple through time, shaping not only cuisine but social structures and cultural expectations for generations to come? The answers remain part of the subtle legacy of medieval dining, a world where food was never just sustenance, but a tool of culture, politics, and memory, carefully prepared, lavishly presented, and endlessly observed. Imagine walking through a bustling medieval market in northern Europe, stalls brim with grain, vegetables, and a few barrels of salted fish. But your attention is drawn to a more precious commodity: small piles of salt, sacks of pepper, cinnamon sticks, cloves, and tiny bottles of saffron. In the medieval imagination, flavor is not a trivial matter. It is a marker of status, a symbol of wealth, and a necessity for survival. Behind the simple act of seasoning lies a complex web of commerce, politics, and human ingenuity that shapes life in ways you might never have expected. Salt, the foundation of preservation. Salt is both ordinary and extraordinary in medieval life. Unlike the luxury spices that travel from distant lands, salt is abundant in some regions, but scarce in others, making it a strategic resource. Its primary value is practical preservation. Without refrigeration, perishable foods, meat, fish, and some dairy would spoil within days. Salt draws moisture from food, slows bacterial growth, and allows for storage over months. A salted herring, for example, can sustain a peasant family or a noble household for weeks. Yet, salt is not always easy to obtain. Coastal regions may produce it through evaporation in salt pans, while inland areas rely on brine springs or transported barrels. Because it is so vital, control over salt sources carries political and economic weight. Kings, dukes, and local lords levy taxes on salt, sometimes creating monopolies. Salt roads, overland roads specifically for transporting salt, develop, linking towns, monasteries, and trading centers. In a world without refrigeration, the scarcity or expense of salt could dictate survival during long winters, illustrating its dual role as both flavor enhancer and life-sustaining tool. Spices, symbols of wealth and status. Unlike salt, spices such as pepper, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and saffron are not necessary for survival, but are desired for their exotic flavors. Spices arrive from distant lands: India, Southeast Asia, the Spice Islands, and the Middle East. They are transported over thousands of miles through complex trade networks involving ships, caravans, and merchants navigating political boundaries, pirates, and rough terrain. A single pinch of these spices represents weeks, sometimes months of labor, transport, and negotiation, making them symbols of extreme wealth. In the noble household, spices are used generously. They mask the flavors of preserved meat, demonstrate culinary sophistication, and convey access to distant lands. Cinnamon might perfume a pie, cloves season a roasted fowl, and saffron color a simple stew into a luxurious dish. Even among merchants and minor nobles, the ability to sprinkle pepper or sugar on a meal conveys status, taste, and connection to a global economy. Long before the term globalization existed, the political power of salt and spice, the control and taxation of salt and spice can shape entire economies. Kings and lords use salt taxes to fund armies, build castles, or maintain courts. Cities and towns often compete to control salt production or distribution, while guilds of merchants manage the complex logistics of importing and selling exotic spices. Access to these goods influences alliances, marriage negotiations, and trade agreements. A well-stocked pantry is a sign not merely of taste, but of influence, wealth, and strategic planning. Salt and spice are also tools of diplomacy. Presenting rare spices as gifts cements alliances, while the ability to host lavishly spiced feasts demonstrates power and cultural sophistication. Even a humble ruler with access to imported pepper might impress a visiting dignitary more than one with abundant local resources, but less refined cuisine. Everyday life and flavor for the common peasant, however, these luxuries are largely inaccessible. Salt may be rationed, carefully measured, and used sparingly to preserve essential foods rather than flavor them. Pepper and exotic spices are rare if ever seen, and certainly not part of the daily diet. Herbs such as parsley, sage, or dill serve as local substitutes, offering modest flavor and some medicinal benefits. Yet even in this scarcity, the desire for taste persists. Peasants develop subtle culinary ingenuity, combining available grains, legumes, and vegetables with herbs, fermentation, and smoke to create meals that are tolerable, sometimes even enjoyable, within the limits of survival. Salt and spice as hidden conflicts. The demand for these ingredients also fuels hidden conflicts. Merchants might compete violently for access to trade routes. Pirates target spice-laden ships. Cities and kingdoms enforce monopolies or tariffs to control pricing. Wars and skirmishes, even far from the kitchen table, can be traced back to the pursuit of flavor and preservation. In this sense, the medieval appetite for salt and spice is not trivial. It drives commerce, conflict, and exploration, linking distant parts of the world in unexpected ways. A reflection on scarcity and desire. When you observe the value placed on a simple pinch of salt or a handful of peppercorns, you begin to understand how scarcity shapes human desire. The ordinary becomes extraordinary when it is rare, essential, or difficult to acquire. In the medieval imagination, flavor is inseparable from status, survival, and social meaning. A meal without sufficient salt may be nutritionally sufficient, but culturally inadequate. A dish without exotic spice may nourish the body but fail to impress the mind or reflect prestige. A lingering question as you watch barrels of salt being loaded onto carts, or exotic spices unpacked from merchant ships, you might ask, how did these simple substances, one essential, one luxurious, reshape medieval society, trade, and power structures? And more subtly, how did the struggle to acquire, control, and display salt and spice influence human behavior, ambition, and perception across the centuries? The answer is not immediately visible. It is hidden in the preserved herring of a peasant family, the spiced pies of a noble banquet, and the vast networks of merchants, lords, and kings whose lives were intertwined by a desire for flavor, preservation, and influence. A quiet war fought in markets, kitchens, and dining halls alike. As you follow the path of salt barrels along rugged roads or trace the journey of pepper and cloves across oceans, it becomes clear that these simple substances shaped the medieval world in ways far beyond the kitchen. Salt and spice were not merely ingredients. They were drivers of commerce, instruments of power, and markers of social identity. Understanding their influence requires examining the networks, conflicts, and social dynamics that brought flavor and preservation into the everyday lives of both peasants and nobles. The logistics of salt, seemingly ordinary, is deceptively strategic. Coastal salt pans, inland brine springs, and mine deposits form the backbone of medieval preservation. Towns and cities often develop around these resources, and control of salt supplies is a source of revenue and political leverage. Salt roads, carefully maintained trade routes, carry this essential commodity from production centers to towns, monasteries, and castles. Along these roads, tolls are collected, caravans are protected or taxed, and entire local economies revolve around this single mineral. Because salt preserves food, its scarcity can trigger crises. In winters where local production is insufficient or transport is disrupted by weather, armies, cities, and households alike can face shortages. Monarchs exploit this dependency, levying salt taxes, sometimes called gabelle in France, that enrich the treasury and reinforce the authority of the crown. Salt becomes both lifeline and lever of control, an invisible thread linking ordinary meals to governance and power. Spices and the global economy. Exotic spices, by contrast, trace vast global networks. Cloves from the Maluku Islands, cinnamon from Ceylon, nutmeg from Indonesia, and black pepper from India traverse thousands of miles before reaching European kitchens. Each shipment involves multiple layers of trade: local harvesters, regional merchants, long-distance traders, ship captains, and finally European importers. Along the way, the value of spices increases dramatically, creating enormous profit margins but also incentivizing piracy, theft, and smuggling. This network has profound social and economic effects. Merchant guilds in Mediterranean and northern European cities monopolize spice trade, accumulate wealth, and exert political influence. Spices also create subtle class distinctions. Only nobles and wealthy merchants can afford them regularly, while peasants rarely encounter these ingredients, except in stories or festivals. In this way, taste becomes a marker of social division, a visible signal of wealth, education, and sophistication. The cultural and religious context. Salt and spices also intersect with religion and cultural norms. Religious fasting, especially during Lent, creates predictable demand for preserved foods and fish, making salt essential for survival. Spices, meanwhile, are used to enhance fasting meals and provide culinary variety without violating prohibitions on meat. They transform otherwise bland diets into acceptable, even desirable sustenance. Monasteries, with their gardens and libraries, often preserve knowledge about spices, preservation, and medicinal uses, acting as intermediaries between domestic kitchens and global trade. Beyond utility, spices also serve symbolic roles. Saffron's golden hue conveys opulence, cinnamon's aroma evokes luxury, and pepper's rarity signals status. Meals become performances of taste and refinement, with each sprinkle or pinch communicating wealth, access, and education. To host a spiced feast is not merely to feed the body, but to project authority and social sophistication. Hidden conflicts and the wars over flavor. The value of these substances ensures that they are also sources of conflict. Salt taxes provoke revolts. Control over salt mines or trade routes can spark local disputes. Spices, so rare and profitable, become targets for piracy and competition among cities and states. These wars over flavor are often invisible to the average peasant, but shape broader political landscapes. They also influence exploration, as European powers seek direct access to spice-producing regions, leading centuries later to maritime expeditions and colonial ventures. Even within households, salt and spice carry subtle tensions. Nobles hoard or distribute spices to demonstrate generosity, while merchants control access to exotic flavors, creating leverage. Peasants and lower-class consumers, meanwhile, navigate scarcity with ingenuity, stretching small amounts of salt to preserve food or substituting herbs to imitate spiced flavors. The competition for taste, therefore, is both global and deeply personal. Practical implications for daily life for the medieval household, noble or peasant, the presence or absence of salt and spice dictates daily choices. Salted meat and fish provide stability, while unseasoned grains and vegetables might sustain hunger but fail to satisfy taste or cultural expectations. Even minor economies of use, like rubbing a herring with salt or saving a pinch of pepper for a special occasion, reflect centuries of accumulated knowledge about preservation, flavor, and social signaling. The reliance on salt and spice also illustrates the fragility of medieval life. Without access to these key commodities, food becomes less safe, less palatable, and less socially acceptable. Scarcity influences decisions at every level, from peasant households rationing preserved foods to noble courts planning lavish feasts. In this sense, flavor is inseparable from survival, status, and identity. A lingering question as you observe the intricate networks of merchants, the strategic control of salt mines, and the ceremonial use of exotic spices at noble tables, you may wonder, how did the pursuit of taste, preservation, and prestige shape human behavior across continents? How did these invisible threads of commerce and culture influence not only diets but the political and economic structures of medieval society? The answers remain embedded in the delicate balance between necessity and desire, survival and indulgence, as well as the unseen human labor that transported a pinch of pepper or a barrel of salt from distant lands to the medieval table. The story of flavor is, in fact, a story of human ingenuity, ambition, and interconnection that quietly shaped history long before modern globalization. As the last of the spices are carefully stored in merchant chests, and the final salt barrels are counted, you begin to see that these simple substances, salt and spice, were far more than culinary tools. They were engines of power, instruments of social distinction, and drivers of trade, politics, and exploration. From the peasant's modest diet to the opulent feasts of kings and nobles, the journey of flavor traces a subtle yet profound influence across medieval life, leaving a legacy that continues to shape human societies today. Salt sustaining life and society, salt's significance cannot be overstated. Its practical function, preserving food, made it essential for survival. Without salt, meat, fish, and even certain vegetables would spoil quickly, leaving households vulnerable to hunger and disease. Salt became a cornerstone of human sustenance, dictating seasonal preservation practices, influencing trade routes, and even shaping political power. Monarchs and lords recognized this influence, levying taxes and monopolies on salt production. Control over salt sources meant control over life and commerce. Wars were waged, revolts sparked, and cities thrived or declined based on access to this vital mineral. For peasants, salt was a precious resource carefully rationed to ensure that essential food could last through harsh winters. Every pinch held value far beyond taste. It represented survival planning and resilience. Spices' status, desire, and global connection. Spices, by contrast, were symbols of luxury, status, and global connection. The exotic flavors arriving from distant lands transformed European cuisine and provided a subtle yet powerful marker of wealth. To sprinkle pepper or cinnamon on a dish was to communicate access to international trade networks, sophisticated taste, and cultural refinement. The pursuit of spices drove economic and political strategies, inspiring exploration and long-distance commerce. Merchant guilds controlled supply, naval expeditions sought direct trade routes, and cities profited from transit and taxation. Beyond the table, spices shaped social interactions, influenced marriage alliances, and defined the boundaries of prestige. Their rarity and expense created a world in which flavor was inseparable from power and perception. Cultural implications and social hierarchies. Salt and spice illuminate the contrasts between social classes. Peasants subsist largely without spices, ration salt carefully, and rely on local herbs for flavor. Nobles, meanwhile, indulge in exotic, spiced feasts, displaying wealth and authority through culinary spectacle. This difference reinforces social hierarchy, providing constant, tangible evidence of status. Even within the nobility, variations in access and presentation signify rank, ambition, and influence. Religion and cultural practice further influence usage. Fasting periods necessitate reliance on fish and preserved foods, while spiced dishes during feasts enhance both flavor and ritual significance. Food thus becomes a language communicating wealth, observance, and sophistication, while also reflecting necessity and survival. Trade, conflict, and the expansion of knowledge. The networks created to supply salt and spices had far-reaching consequences. They encouraged urban development, supported merchant economies, and indirectly fueled exploration and colonization. The desire for flavor became intertwined with commerce, diplomacy, and conflict, driving innovations in logistics, navigation, and finance. In this sense, the medieval appetite for seasoning contributed to the shaping of Europe's economic and political landscape in ways that resonate even centuries later. Innovation and culinary expertise, the management and preparation of salt and spice also fostered knowledge and skill. Cooks developed sophisticated techniques to preserve food, blend flavors, and create elaborate presentations. Recipes and household practices reflected experimentation, observation, and the accumulation of generational knowledge. Even a seemingly simple dish, meat preserved in salt or a stew lightly spiced with cinnamon, represents layers of human ingenuity, careful labor, and historical circumstance. A reflection on human desire and necessity. What is striking about salt and spice is how desire and necessity intersect. Salt is essential, sustaining life, yet its scarcity can create conflict. Spices are largely unnecessary for survival, yet their pursuit drives trade, exploration, and status competition. Together they reveal how humans organize society, allocate resources, and assign value, not only to what keeps us alive, but to what signals who we are and what we can access. The medieval table, from peasant to noble, is a reflection of this dynamic, a quiet theater of survival, prestige, and global connection. A lingering question as you imagine barrels of salt stacked in storehouses or sacks of pepper arriving from across continents. You might ask, how did these simple substances shape not only diets but societies, economies, and even global exploration? How did the hunger for flavor influence ambition, hierarchy, and human ingenuity in ways we still feel today? The story of salt and spice is, in essence, a story of human connection. It links survival to indulgence, local labor to global trade, and ordinary meals to extraordinary voyages. These humble ingredients, essential and exotic, crafted the tastes, politics, and economies of medieval Europe, leaving a legacy that continues to flavor our understanding of history. Imagine walking through a medieval village, the sun just rising over timber-framed houses. The smell of fresh bread mingles with the faint, sweet aroma of brewing ale, wafting from a nearby hearth or communal brewery. In medieval Europe, ale and beer are not mere indulgences, they're essential staples vital to nutrition, hydration, and social life. For peasants and nobles alike, the daily consumption of a mug of ale is as ordinary and necessary as eating bread, yet it carries far-reaching implications for health, labor, economy, and community. The importance of ale in daily life. Water is not always safe to drink in medieval towns and villages. Wells may be contaminated, rivers polluted, and rainwater inconsistent. Ale and beer, by contrast, are brewed with boiling water and fermentation, which kill harmful pathogens, making them safer to consume. Even weak, low-alcohol, small beer is a source of calories, hydration, and nourishment. Children, laborers, and the elderly alike drink these brews daily, incorporating them into every meal. For many peasants, a mug of small beer is as sustaining as a slice of bread, providing liquid calories when food is scarce. Ale also serves a practical function for workers. The labor-intensive life of medieval peasants, tending fields, tending livestock, or working in mills, demands energy, and ale delivers carbohydrates and some protein in liquid form. It is easy to carry, relatively filling, and can be consumed quickly during breaks in work. For itinerant laborers and travelers, ale provides sustenance without requiring a full kitchen or extensive preparation. Ingredients and brewing practices. Ale is made from barley, water, and yeast. Hops, though more common in later centuries, are initially rare, so early brews are often sweet and malty rather than bitter. Brewing is both an art and a science, passed down through generations. Every household, large or small, may brew its own ale, adjusting recipes for taste, strength, and availability of grain. Peasants experiment with grains, herbs, and fermentation times, often creating local variations that distinguish one village from another. In larger households and monasteries, brewing becomes a specialized craft. Monks, in particular, refine techniques, producing stronger beers that can be stored longer or sold for profit. Noble households may hire skilled brewers to supply high-quality ale for feasts or daily consumption. The process, malting, mashing, boiling, fermenting, and storing, requires knowledge, labor, and careful timing. Mistakes can result in spoiled batches, sour flavors, or weak alcohol, making brewing both an art of precision and practical survival. Social and communal aspects. Ale is more than food, it is a focal point of social life. Taverns, alehouses, and communal brew houses serve as gathering places for conversation, news, and negotiation. Villagers discuss work, politics, and local events over mugs of ale, while craftsmen, laborers, and travelers exchange information and ideas. Brewing and sharing ale strengthen communal bonds, marking celebrations, religious observances, and seasonal cycles. For the nobility, ale also plays a role in hospitality. Though wine may dominate the upper tables, ale is served in households where local grain is abundant, demonstrating resource management and cultural adaptability. Even within elite circles, knowledge of brewing reflects status. A well-prepared ale demonstrates skill, care, and access to resources, while poorly brewed batches can embarrass hosts or signal mismanagement. Nutrition and daily consumption. The nutritional value of ale is considerable. Small beer contains carbohydrates, trace proteins, and minerals from the grain and water. For peasants with limited diets, it contributes calories that might otherwise be unavailable. Moderate alcohol content provides mild relaxation or appetite stimulation, aiding digestion in diets heavy in bread and grains. Yet consumption must be balanced. Stronger ales, often reserved for nobles or special occasions, can intoxicate, leading to poor decision-making or social tension. Even so, for ordinary households, ale is a predictable, nourishing staple, safe, filling, and socially central. Economic implications. Brewing drives local economies. Grain is purchased, traded, and allocated specifically for ale production. Brewing requires fuel, containers, labor, and sometimes specialized ingredients like hops or spices. Surplus ale can be sold, generating income for households, monasteries, or towns. In some regions, brewing is strictly regulated by local authorities or guilds, reflecting its importance as both food and commodity. This regulation also ensures quality, protects consumers, and provides predictable income streams for communities. Ale is thus both sustenance and economic engine, a vital resource shaping labor, trade, and social cohesion. A lingering thought as you imagine villagers gathering at the communal brew house, or a noble household receiving barrels of carefully crafted ale, you might wonder, how did this humble beverage shape medieval life in ways far beyond taste or intoxication? How did ale influence labor, nutrition, commerce, and social bonds across villages, towns, and even castles? The story of brewing is more than the story of flavor. It is a reflection of human ingenuity, adaptation, and the subtle ways ordinary substances sustain life, bind communities, and shape culture across centuries. As you step into the medieval brewery, the scene becomes more than the aroma of malt and yeast. It is a center of labor, innovation, and community. Brewing is at once practical and cultural, a process that sustains life, fosters social cohesion, and connects local economies to broader networks of trade and governance. To understand ale fully, you must examine not just the liquid in the mug, but the complex systems that create, regulate, and celebrate it. Household brewing skill and tradition. For most peasant households, brewing is an ordinary domestic task, passed down through generations. Women often lead the brewing process, managing grain preparation, fermentation, and storage. Recipes are flexible, adapting to seasonal availability of barley, wheat, or oats. Even small variations, a longer fermentation, an added herb, a slightly higher temperature, result in different flavors, strengths, and qualities. In essence, every household develops a microculture of brewing, reflecting resource availability, local tastes, and practical knowledge. Fermentation, though invisible, is carefully monitored. Cooks rely on sight, smell, and taste rather than modern measurement. Too short, and the beer is weak; too long, and it becomes sour or overly alcoholic. This careful observation is critical to avoid waste, as failed batches could mean loss of both sustenance and economic opportunity. Brewing, in this context, is not leisure, it is survival, nutrition, and a daily responsibility. Monastic and noble brewing monasteries play a central role in the refinement of brewing. Monks, with time, education, and access to larger resources, experiment with stronger beers, new flavors, and longer storage methods. Abbeys often brew surplus ale to sell, creating revenue that supports charitable works, building projects, and the monastery's sustainability. Recipes recorded in monastic manuscripts reveal detailed knowledge of fermentation, water quality, and even flavoring agents like herbs and honey, demonstrating an early scientific approach to brewing. Noble households, meanwhile, hire skilled brewers to supply both daily sustenance and ceremonial beverages. All becomes part of hospitality, feasts, and gift-giving, sometimes even rivaling wine in importance depending on region, season, and economic capacity. The presence of well-brewed ale signals management skill, access to resources, and social sophistication. Economic networks and regulation. Ale is deeply entwined with the medieval economy. Grain, the primary ingredient, is carefully allocated, often forming a substantial portion of the household or village food supply. Brewing requires fuel, wood or peat, water, containers, and labor, all of which contribute to local commerce. Surplus ale is sold at markets, supplied to taverns, or used as barter, integrating it into trade networks that link villages, towns, and cities. Regulation is common. Local authorities, guilds, or lords enforce standards for quality, taxation, and pricing. Alehouses are inspected, brewers licensed, and quantities monitored to protect consumers and ensure consistent supply. In some regions, the government mandates brewing practices to maintain public safety, reflecting the beverage's vital role in daily life. Through regulation, ale is not just a drink, it is a controlled, socially recognized necessity. Social and cultural functions. Ale's role extends beyond nutrition and commerce. It shapes social interaction. Taverns and alehouses are meeting points for villagers, merchants, and travelers, facilitating the exchange of news, ideas, and community cohesion. Communal brewing strengthens family and village bonds, as households share techniques, labor, and harvests. Seasonal festivals, weddings, and religious observances frequently revolve around ale, highlighting its cultural importance. Even within noble circles, ale retains social significance. A carefully brewed batch may accompany a feast, a diplomatic meeting, or a ceremonial toast. Knowledge of brewing becomes a subtle marker of skill and sophistication, and the beverage itself functions as both sustenance and symbol. Technological innovation. Brewing drives early technological experimentation. Techniques for controlling fermentation, managing temperature, and improving storage are developed locally and transmitted through monastic manuscripts or apprenticeships. Wooden barrels, ceramic vessels, and later, copper kettles, reflect innovations aimed at preserving quality, extending shelf life, and enabling transport. Even rudimentary filtration, stirring, or clarifying methods demonstrate practical problem-solving and accumulated knowledge. This combination of observation, experimentation, and practical trial and error is remarkable given the lack of formal scientific frameworks. Brewing exemplifies how necessity and cultural value drive technological adaptation, even in the ordinary contexts of daily life. Health and nutrition considerations. Ale's nutritional importance cannot be overstated. Small beer, consumed in place of potentially unsafe water, provides essential hydration, calories, and trace nutrients. Moderate alcohol content can stimulate appetite, aid digestion, and offer a mild relaxing effect after laborious work. In times of scarcity, ale serves as both food and drink, a liquid supplement to limited grains and vegetables. Yet, consumption must be managed. Excessive drinking of stronger ales can impair judgment, lead to illness, or exacerbate social tensions. Balancing nutrition, strength, and social function is therefore a subtle skill embedded in medieval brewing practice. A lingering question as you imagine villagers gathering at taverns, monks refining recipes, and noble brewers orchestrating production for household and ceremonial use. You might ask, how did this simple, ubiquitous beverage shape the rhythms, economy, and social networks of medieval life? How did the daily consumption of ale influence health, labor, and community cohesion across centuries? The answer is found not in grand battles or political treaties, but in the quiet, everyday act of brewing, a practice that nourished, connected, and sustained countless lives, shaping medieval society from the ground up. As the day winds down in a medieval village, the scent of ale still lingers from taverns, breweries, and household hearths. Mugs clink, conversations flow, and the work of brewing continues behind closed doors. Ale and beer are far more than beverages. They are central threads woven into the fabric of daily life, shaping nutrition, social interaction, commerce, and even governance. To understand medieval society, one must understand the profound role of this humble liquid. Ale as daily sustenance. Ale is not indulgence, it is necessity. Water, often unsafe, is replaced by this brewed staple, making hydration reliable and safer. Small beer, with low alcohol content, serves as a consistent source of calories, supplementing meager diets of bread, grains, and legumes. Laborers rely on ale to sustain energy for long hours in the fields or workshops. Children, too, partake, consuming diluted or weak beer as part of their daily nourishment. In essence, ale is a liquid staple, fulfilling a role similar to modern staples like rice or bread. essential, ubiquitous and taken for granted. Cultural cohesion and social life. Ale shapes social life in subtle but profound ways. Taverns, alehouses and communal brew houses are centers of gossip, negotiation and entertainment. Festivals, weddings, and religious celebrations often revolve around communal consumption of ale, reinforcing cultural rituals and social cohesion. Brewing itself is a social activity, often led by women, involving sharing of techniques, ingredients, and labor across households. This fosters bonds between neighbors, families, and villages. Ale is both sustenance and social glue, a medium through which communities connect and traditions endure. Economic and technological influence. Brewing drives economic activity. Grain allocation, fuel procurement, and labor create local commerce, while surplus ale can be sold, generating income for households, monasteries, and towns. Regulatory oversight, guild involvement, and taxation reflect the beverage's economic importance. Technological innovation accompanies brewing practices, from improved fermentation techniques to better storage and transport vessels. Even without formal scientific understanding, brewers refine methods through observation and experimentation, influencing later developments in food preservation, hygiene, and beverage production. Ale and social hierarchies. Ale is also intertwined with status. While peasants rely on small beer for daily sustenance, monasteries, towns, and noble households produce stronger, more refined brews for sale, feasts, or ceremonial purposes. Knowledge of brewing and access to higher quality ingredients reflect social position. In noble or monastic settings, ale demonstrates organization, skill, and cultural sophistication. Even within ordinary households, brewing skill can elevate reputation, signify competence, and contribute to communal respect. Health, risk, and balance. Ale provides essential nutrition, yet its consumption requires balance. Excessive drinking of stronger ales can lead to health issues or social disruption, while too weak a brew fails to provide adequate sustenance. Medieval brewers and consumers navigate this tension daily, adjusting recipes, fermentation times, and consumption patterns. In this way, brewing reflects human ingenuity in managing risk, nutrition, and social expectations, practices that underpin survival and cultural continuity. Enduring legacy. The influence of ale and brewing extends far beyond medieval kitchens. Recipes, techniques, and traditions persist, informing modern beer production and brewing culture. The social function of communal drinking, entertainment, and hospitality continues in pubs, taverns, and festivals. Economically, brewing shaped local trade, influenced taxation and regulation, and contributed to market development. Culturally, it reinforced community bonds, marked celebrations, and reflected hierarchies. Ale is thus both a window into medieval life and a lasting legacy of human adaptation, creativity, and social organization. A lingering question as you picture villagers gathering in alehouses, monks perfecting recipes, and noble households orchestrating production for both sustenance and ceremony. You might ask, how did this everyday beverage shape the rhythms, hierarchies, and social bonds of medieval society? How did a simple mug of ale connect nutrition, labor, economy, and culture in ways as significant as any political treaty or military campaign? The story of ale reminds us that ordinary things, liquid, grain, yeast, can wield extraordinary influence. Brewing sustained bodies, connected communities, and structured society. It is a quiet testament to human ingenuity, adaptability, and the hidden complexity of daily life in medieval Europe. Imagine the end of a long day in a medieval village. Farmers have returned from the fields, craftsmen from their workshops, and merchants from bustling markets. Darkness descends quickly, as there is no artificial lighting beyond flickering candles or the occasional hearth fire. Sleep is not merely a time for rest, it is an essential component of survival, yet the conditions under which people slept in medieval Europe were far from comfortable by modern standards. Beds, bedding, warmth, and nighttime safety all reflect a society where daily life was laborious, resources were limited, and comfort was a luxury few could afford. The structure of medieval bedrooms. For most people, the bedroom is not a separate, private room. In peasants' homes, the bedroom is often a corner of a larger multi-purpose space. The same area serves for cooking, eating, and sleeping. Privacy is minimal. Families may share a single bed or mattress on the floor, with straw or rushes providing bedding. Heat from the hearth reaches the sleeping area poorly, especially in cold winters, making warmth a daily concern. Noble households offer more comfort, but even there, bedrooms are sparse compared to modern expectations. Beds may be larger, with wooden frames, ropes, and thick mattresses stuffed with straw, feathers, or wool. Curtains or tapestries provide some insulation and privacy, yet drafts and cold floors remain constant challenges. Nighttime comfort depends heavily on resources and preparation. Bedding materials and comfort. Bedding materials are significant determinants of comfort and warmth. Straw is inexpensive and common among peasants, yet it provides limited insulation and can harbor pests. Wealthier households invest in feathers, wool, or down to create softer, warmer mattresses and blankets. Sheets, often linen, provide cleanliness, though they are laundered infrequently due to labor constraints. Pillows, if present, are minimal, usually stuffed with straw, wool, or down. Even among nobles, bedding is designed more for status and display than true comfort. Ornamental coverings, embroidered hangings, and canopies signal wealth, but warmth still requires layered blankets and careful preparation. Sleep is often interrupted by noise, drafts, or the demands of household staff. Nighttime practices and routines. Sleep routines are closely tied to natural light and daily labor. Without modern lighting, people rise at dawn and retire at dusk, dividing their rest into predictable periods. Some records suggest a biphasic sleep pattern, with a first sleep and second sleep, separated by periods of quiet activity, prayer, or household chores. Candles and hearth fires provide limited illumination during these intervals. Peasants often sleep in shifts or in communal arrangements to conserve heat. Animals may share the sleeping area to provide warmth, a practical solution that also carries hygienic risks. Noble households enforce more structured routines, with servants attending to lighting fires and bedside comforts, but even here sleep is dictated by labor, duty, and seasonality. The cold, the dark, and health concerns. Temperature control is a significant concern. Stone and timber houses are poorly insulated, winters are harsh, and bedrooms are often frigid. Heating is primarily from the hearth, which does not reach all areas evenly. Illness and fatigue are exacerbated by exposure to cold during sleep, and medieval medical theory emphasizes the importance of warm, dry conditions for health. People layer clothing, blankets, and even straw to combat cold, highlighting how sleep is both a physical and survival challenge. Darkness, though natural, presents its own difficulties. Without reliable light sources, navigation within the home is hazardous. Nighttime awakenings carry risk of injury or pest encounters. Nobles mitigate these dangers with staff assistance, nightlights, and enclosed spaces, yet even they cannot fully escape the practical limitations of medieval architecture and technology. Sleeping arrangements and social dynamics. Sleeping arrangements reflect social structures. Families share beds out of necessity, reinforcing bonds but also highlighting scarcity. Nobles may have separate chambers for men, women, and children, yet servants and guards often sleep nearby, ensuring safety and readiness for duty. Status is expressed through the quality of bed, bedding, and room arrangement. The act of sleeping is never entirely private. It is embedded within household hierarchy, social roles, and daily labor cycles. A lingering question as you imagine the cramped, cold corners of peasant homes, or the drafty yet ornate chambers of nobles, you might ask, how did these conditions influence the way medieval people rested, dreamed, and experienced fatigue? How did the interplay of labor, social hierarchy, and material scarcity shape the nightly rhythms of ordinary lives across centuries? The answers lie not in modern comfort, but in adaptation, resilience, and the subtle strategies that allowed medieval people to survive, and sometimes even thrive, through the challenges of the night. Sleep, in this context, is more than rest. It is a window into human endurance and the quiet rhythms of history. As the evening deepens across medieval Europe, sleep is more than a physiological necessity. It is a carefully navigated part of life, intertwined with culture, superstition, hygiene, and social hierarchy. The medieval bedroom, whether in a peasant hut or a noble manor, reflects practical adaptation, belief systems, and the constant negotiation between comfort, safety, and survival. Understanding these nighttime practices offers a window into the rhythms of daily life and the subtle ways humans coped with labor, scarcity, and uncertainty. Hygiene and bedding practices. Hygiene is a constant concern in medieval sleeping arrangements. Bathing is infrequent, often limited to once a week or during specific festivals, due to scarce water, fuel, or time. Bedding, particularly straw mattresses, is rarely changed frequently, creating conditions for lice, fleas, and other pests. In wealthier households, sheets and blankets are laundered more often, yet even nobles contend with drafts, dampness, and occasional infestations. People develop creative strategies to improve sleep hygiene. Straw is replaced or supplemented with fresh rushes, herbs are added for fragrance or pest control, and blankets are layered for warmth. Nobles sometimes use aromatic oils or incense to freshen chambers, while peasants rely on smoke from hearth fires to deter insects. These practices, though rudimentary by modern standards, reflect careful observation of comfort, health, and seasonal conditions. Superstition and the night. Medieval nights are imbued with superstition. Darkness is associated with spirits, witches, and misfortune. People employ various protective measures, charms, amulets, prayers, and even strategic placement of objects in the bedroom to ward off evil. Some believe that certain herbs, like sage or rue, protect against nightmares or disease during sleep. Nighttime is a liminal period bridging daily labor and spiritual reflection where health, morality, and fortune are thought to be especially vulnerable. Monasteries and churches reinforce this mindset through prayer schedules, vigil practices, and guidance on nightly behavior. Nobles may have chaplains or attendants reciting prayers to ensure protection and proper conduct. Even common folk adapt these rituals in simpler ways, highlighting the integration of belief and practicality in medieval life. Lighting and nighttime visibility. Without modern lighting, navigating the bedroom at night is challenging. Candles are expensive and scarce, only wealthier households can afford them regularly. Hearths provide limited illumination, and their warmth is uneven. Peasants often sleep through darkness, rising with the sun, while nobles may use candles or torches sparingly, balancing cost and necessity. Nighttime tasks, such as tending children, caring for the sick, or managing animals, require careful movement and sometimes memorized routines to avoid injury. Even the act of getting into bed becomes a practiced skill. Anticipating obstacles, sharing space with others, and avoiding drafts are all part of the nocturnal choreography of survival. Managing fatigue and work cycles. Sleep is structured around labor demands. Farmers, artisans, and laborers rise at dawn and retire at dusk, often sleeping in long stretches punctuated by household or farm duties. Monks and nuns divide night into periods of rest and prayer, known as canonical hours, integrating spiritual discipline with physical needs. Nobles, with staff attending to household management, may enjoy slightly more flexibility, yet their sleep is influenced by political, ceremonial, or social obligations. Biphasic sleep patterns involving a first sleep and second sleep are common. The interval between sleeps may be spent in prayer, reflection, household chores, or socializing. These patterns reveal an adaptation to both natural light cycles and labor demands, balancing rest with the necessities of daily life. Safety and security at night. Safety concerns shape sleeping arrangements. Peasants often sleep with animals for warmth, which also offers protection against intruders. Security is a shared responsibility, with families coordinating placement in the home to respond quickly to threats. Nobles rely on guards, fortified chambers, and attendants to ensure safety, but even they face risks from fires, structural hazards, or unexpected visitors. Sleeping is thus never entirely passive. It is a negotiated state of vigilance, comfort, and survival. Social dynamics and sleeping arrangements mirror societal structures. Families share beds out of necessity, while in larger households, servants and retainers occupy separate spaces close to the noble chambers. Children and elders may sleep together for warmth and care. Privacy is limited, and the act of sleeping becomes a communal experience. Even personal discomfort is secondary to practical concerns: warmth, safety, and coordination within the household. A lingering question as you imagine families huddled in straw-filled corners, nobles adjusting heavy blankets over ornate beds, and monks observing night prayers. You might ask, how did these sleeping practices shape medieval perceptions of health, labor, and personal space? How did the interplay of superstition, hygiene, and daily routines influence the quality of rest, the management of fatigue, and the rhythms of life in a world without modern conveniences? The answers reveal a delicate balance of adaptation, belief, and human resilience, a system in which sleep is both necessity and cultural practice, quietly structuring the daily lives of countless individuals across medieval Europe.